So you're a white belt in jiu-jitsu right now, or you're possibly thinking about training jiu-jitsu for the first time. Just know that the first big benchmark in your jiu-jitsu journey is making it to the coveted blue belt. That's like the big aha. That's really what we should be striving for and striving to achieve as a jiu-jitsu white belt. But coming from a guy that's been teaching and training now for over 14 years, there are really 5 big reasons why I see white belts get their journey kind of derailed or cause them to quit training altogether. So in today's video, we're going to talk about how we can kind of overcome these things and what they really are. That way you guys can watch out for them. So let's talk about it in this video right now. How's it going, everyone? My name is Chasen Hill. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I've been teaching and training jiu-jitsu now for over 14 years. So if you guys like all things jiu-jitsu, it's probably a pretty good channel for you guys to check out. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. Also hit that bell icon. That way you guys never miss the latest video whenever it comes out. So the 5 things I'm going to talk about, they're kind of like a pyramid. They're going to be stacked on top of one another. I guess it would be more of an upside down pyramid, like a funnel, because each one kind of causes the other one moving forward. Now, obviously, there's going to be things like, jiu-jitsu's hard physically and injuries and those kinds of things that are going to drive jiu-jitsu students to quitting. And some of that stuff is really kind of outside your control. These are going to be actual things that you guys can control or change or modify in your own jiu-jitsu. That way you can make sure you make it in order to that blue belt. So everything that we're going to be talking about in the prescription is going to be aimed toward getting you toward that blue belt. So the first big one that I want to talk about is time constraint. And so what I mean by time constraint, there's usually 2 types. The first one is someone who cannot train on a consistent schedule, and then another person who's kind of what I call the all-in person. And so both of these people are most likely to quit jiu-jitsu, and time is going to be the issue for them. So the first one about someone who can't be consistent, I think when students walk in the gym and they look at the schedule and they do the trial class, they grossly overestimate the amount of time that they have available in their schedule. And so they can't get on a weekly schedule. And so because you can't do that, then that causes you to quit. You feel like you're not going as frequently, and you feel like it's not worth the money, or maybe you're not progressing in the way that you want. So therefore, that time constraint causes you to quit. The second one about the all-in is someone who is the person that buys like all the gear, shows up seven days a week, trains every class, hits it really hard for 3 months. They change their profile picture to like Elio Gracie after like training for 3 weeks. What happens is they start to shoot up and they try to go through volume, but because they can't maintain that schedule, they start crashing. And this is the person that you usually see who is like the 10-year white belt. And I can guarantee you, if you ask anybody who's a 10-year white belt or took 10 years to become a blue belt, they were probably very inconsistent in their training. And they trained a lot, then they came down and they started again, and came down. Getting on a regular schedule is super important and valuable, and not overtraining is also another big importance as well too. Your prescription for time constraint is going to be 2 to 4 days a week. I think if you can train 2 to 4 days a week on a consistent basis, right, you will make it to that coveted blue belt over time in a very reasonable amount of time. 2 days a week is enough to continue to refresh the information that you have, to see it on a regular basis, and 4 days a week isn't enough to be burnt out. Some of you guys will disagree. Some of you guys will say, hey, the all-in guys are the only guys I want to train with, and the all-in people are the only people that should get it. That's great. But literally the thousands of students who I've seen walk in and quit, that hardly ever works. So the next thing is plateauing. So obviously, a lot of times what happens is the time constraint creates a plateauing effect. And so when students feel like their jiu-jitsu plateaus, that can cause them to quit, especially at white belt. So a plateau, just as a quick reminder, it just means that it's flatlined, right? You're not really improving and you're not really decreasing. You're just kind of here. If we go back to the time constraint, if you're not training on a consistent basis and you can't even train an average of 2 to 4 days a week, well then yeah, you're not going to feel like your jiu-jitsu improves very much because you're not actually on the mat training. You can get some values by watching schmucks like me and a bunch of other internet people, but if you're not actually physically on the mat training, then it's very tough to get good at. And then if you're the all-in guy, the guy that I talked about earlier, well, yeah, if you're going to take, all this time, you're going to hit it with volume and hit it with much, and then you take like 6 months off before you can come back and train again, well, then everything that you just learned in that 3 or 4 months that you just hit the ground running hard doesn't seem to be as effective because it's rusty. You got to knock the dirt off. Another reason why plateaus can happen is because unrealistic expectations on how long it should take to get to blue belt. So people solve that problem by hitting it with volume, or because maybe someone's only training like 2 days a week, they think that that's not enough to make it to blue belt in a reasonable amount of time. Usually to make it to blue belt, 1 to 2 years is pretty normal. So if you've been training 2 days a week and you're still a white belt after a year, that's okay. That's normal. It might take you 2 years to become a blue belt. If you're training 6 days a week and you've only been training for a year and you're not a blue belt yet, that's okay. So the next big one is going to be frustration or lack of motivation will cause white belts to quit, right? So this white belt is now feeling like they are frustrated or they lack motivation to continue to train. So now they exit the mat and they no longer train. If you're not able to train on a regular basis, then that creates that plateauing effect. And then if you plateau and you're not improving as much, yeah, I would be frustrated as well too. Sometimes motivation isn't created by the plateau or something. Maybe you are a person who trains on a fairly regular schedule and you're still feeling this frustration. I think frustration is usually caused by a couple of things. A lot of times it means it's unrealistic expectations. Maybe you think you should be improving faster than you are for some reason. And the motivation part usually has to do with lack of goals or lack of benchmarks. And so I know that we have a goal of making it to blue belt. That's a pretty broad goal. Like that's a big picture goal. It's very good to set kind of intermediate benchmarks to get to that goal moving forward as a white belt. Usually when someone, like I said, isn't motivated, it's like they're bored. It's like they don't have a goal to shoot for, right? They don't have anything to achieve. They think blue belt's so far away. They're like, well, what am I going to do in the meantime? Just twiddle my thumbs. Usually what I encourage students to do as general training goals is obviously to learn basics and fundamental moves, but that's very subjective from school to school about what that entails. But just in the sense of like whenever you're training or you're live sparring or rolling, what you should be aiming for as a white belt is to recognize positions, recognize when you should be doing techniques, and recognize when stuff is happening to you. I remember when I was a white belt, I had these big aha moments when I could just realize I was in the bottom of the mount and I knew the technique I could use to escape. Whether it was successful or not, who knew? But I was so excited that I could just recognize what was happening to me and what I needed to do in order to get out of that position. Setting those kinds of benchmarks are very helpful moving forward, and they kind of inch you toward. I recommend as a prescription for that to focus on like defensive and surviving and recognizing positions and recognizing where your techniques can come into play in the middle of you sparring as you're kind of acquiring more basics and fundamentals idea. So let me know down in the comments below, how long were you a jiu-jitsu white belt for? If you're an upper belt, you're gracing me with your presence on this channel, let me know down below how long you're a white belt for. Personally, I was a white belt for over 2 years. I know that sounds crazy. And then if you're a white belt currently, let me know how long you've been training for. Love to hear from you. The next part is confidence issues. So remember, we're back to our funnel thing here. If I can't train consistently, that can lead to plateauing effects. And then that leads to me being frustration, which then if I'm frustrated and I'm unmotivated, then yes, I will have confidence issues in my jiu-jitsu. And then if I'm not confident that what I'm doing is effective or working, or I'm not confident in what I'm learning or that I can actually do jiu-jitsu, then I'll probably quit. This is often what I hear from students is they'll say, well, jiu-jitsu is just not for me. You know, I tried it. I trained for like 6 months and, you know, I just couldn't get it to work and it just didn't work for me. Sometimes that's the case. Maybe you have some severe injury, some physical issue, some really big health issue that prevents that from happening. But I can guarantee you probably what it was one of the previous things. Either you weren't training consistently, or you hit a plateau, or you lacked goals, or you had unrealistic expectations, which created the frustration and the unmotivation. And now that's leading you to have lack of confidence. And confidence is a big part of what keeps you going and driving you toward achieving your blue belt moving forward. Confidence is also kind of a comparison or what you're wanting to measure yourself against to that could help. So what I recommend white belt students do is kind of compare themselves only to other white belt students in the gym. And what I mean by that is I don't mean like compare like how fast you guys are progressing, but all I want you to worry about is how well you're performing against them. As you're climbing that white belt stripes or you're spending time on the mat consistently training as a white belt, start to see how you're doing against other white belts. See if you're recognizing certain techniques and positions. See if you can survive them. Yeah, not just tap them or try to beat them. I think that's a flawed mistake that a lot of students try, is they try to go for the kill too early. You should be trying the same thing I gave you in the frustration prescription, even on other white belts, and see how well you do on that. If you're seeing improvements on those level of students or your own skills, that's a good idea that you're like heading in the right track. If Joe is a white belt and he's training against Mark and he gets destroyed by Mark, well, in 2 months from now, how does he do against Mark? If he's improved a little bit, that's a great sign. That means you're improving against someone who is also your skill. So you need to start to measure that in your own head, whether you write it down on paper or you internally measure it. Find a way to track it, and that will help that confidence issue and know that you guys are moving forward. And then the last big one is a lack of support. And so once again, this is a trickle down effect, right? So because we had time, now we had plateauing, then we had frustration or motivation, now we had confidence issues. Now that brings us to the lack of support. People quit or they get to this point and they feel like they have a lack of support. It's probably piled on top of all of these other things. I guarantee you, you wouldn't feel like you lack support if you were confident, or if you weren't frustrated, or if you weren't plateauing, or if you were training on a consistent basis. You wouldn't feel like you have a lack of support. It's because something in those previous things is creating that lack of support. Now, often students at white belt 2, they're not really sure actually how to ask for help. There's these kind of weird rituals in jiu-jitsu where we're supposed to bow. We line up in certain areas. You don't talk while the instructor's talking. You have to call them professor. So a lot of times students don't really know like if it's appropriate to ask for help or if they just have to kind of go with the flow and they'll eventually figure it out. And I'm here to tell you guys, ask for help. If you're kind of intimidated by your instructor, sometimes instructors have that appearance. I know for myself, I try to be as friendly to my students as possible, but there's this weird thing, this dogma in jiu-jitsu, that when someone has a black belt on, it feels like they're not as approachable as somebody else who's an instructor that's like a purple belt. I know that stuff does happen. So you guys should find like an instructor who you kind of feel like a little bit at ease with, or maybe another training partner that you feel like can be supportive to you, someone who you can ask questions to that you know is going to like help you and even kind of somewhat hold you accountable. When you have a supportive system, that keeps you training on the mat a lot longer. You feel like that you're being accountable to these other people, that people are depending on you, and that you feel like that you need to keep going, or that you're going to help somebody else out. There's support even on here. This YouTube channel is support. There's a bunch of other guys that have a lot of other great channels and great resources for support too. So that's actually probably one of the easiest things to overcome in today's age versus 20 years ago. It was the only school in town. There was no internet content, and it was harder to find that support moving forward. So if you guys need that, comment down below or email me or something, and I'll be your support system and I'll hold you accountable as well. So that wraps up. That concludes today's video. Hopefully you guys found those things helpful. If you guys are interested, grab my free copy of my new acceleration guide. It's going to teach you guys how to 10 times your output of your jiu-jitsu by teaching you how to take leverage of this thing called the training environment. And then make sure you check out the next one of these 2 videos right here moving forward. We'll check out this next video here talking about how to overcoming this plateauing effect. I'll post that video as soon as it's ready. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next one.